Right, okay, good evening everyone. For those of you who've never met me before, but I can see there's quite a few messages coming through that people who've dug with me in the past. My name's Ian Grant, Senior Archaeologist for Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust. I've worked for them since about 2003, I think it was, sometime before that. Gwynedd Archaeological Trust and any other local regional archaeological unit based anywhere in North East Wales, Mid Wales and Cheshire. So I finally came home. This is where I'm from, really. I live literally 15 minutes around the corner from Chirk Castle, so it's been quite a interesting and nice and easy dig for me over the years. We started there in 2019. It's part of a collaboration between the National Trust and Cadw, and also support from the Clwydian range AONB. And between those three partners, we were able to get some funding together to kickstart a little community excavation program. We've been there since 2019, and I think we were generally there over about 10, 11 days each year. So bear that in mind when you're seeing the results of what the volunteers have achieved here, because it's quite impressive given the short amount of time each season that we've been there. So we went there looking, just to show you exactly where Chirk Castle is. There it is in relation to Chirk, which is sort of 5 or 6 miles south of Wrexham in North East Wales. And you can see there's the castle there, and that red line going through the estate is the famous Offa's Dyke. So our project took us there to investigate parts of Offa's Dyke, but for the purpose of tonight, I want to talk to you about the post-medieval archaeology at Chirk Castle that we were looking at. It all started as part of a research proposal to explore the evolution of the later medieval landscape of Chirk Castle itself. And we had 2 evaluation trenches which we excavated northeast of the castle. Now, no, this is not going to be talking about the west building, but I think you need to see and understand how we came to look at our main excavation, which I'm going to talk about tonight. So just a quick look at this. This was an aerial photograph taken by the Royal Commission in Wales in 2018, and just north of the castle there, or northeast of the castle, you can see some crop marks there, multiple lines going across, linear lines going across the landscape, and it was assumed, and rightly so, that these possibly were something to do with the older landscape going back to the sort of 17th, 18th century, layout of formal gardens and such like, which we'll see in a moment. So this is where basically the adventure started for all our volunteers in 2019, and we put in 2 trenches. There's just a map showing sort of we plotted the crop marks across the top there, you can see. And just for your reference, you can see over on the left-hand side in blue, it's also, we picked up on some 18th century buildings, which were no longer upstanding. And we're going to come back to that later, because that's the main part of the presentation tonight. So just coming back to these crop marks, we put 2 trenches in, and there you can see them across there. They were initially sort of machine dug and then finished off by the volunteers, just to see if we could pick up exactly what these crop marks are. There was some geophysics done many years before, and it didn't really, the results weren't particularly impressive at the time for reasons we don't know. It could be geology, or it could be just the weather conditions at the time. But certainly what we did find was quite substantial evidence for what remained of a ha-ha, which is one of those stone walls and ditches that were built in the 17th, 18th century, where when you view out of your castle, your building, your manor house, you've got a nice smooth rolling landscape. But when you view into that building, that property, you've got this animal boundary with the ditch. So you've got a deer park outside, and the aha forms the boundary. The earliest ones were in France, and then I think you start to see them in Britain around about the end of the 17th century. So a great find for us there. It's much denuded, as you can see, but there it is in relation to the castle. And what's interesting about this is that it took quite some excavation to find, and we found it in both trenches. There you can see the wall coming across there. But just let's have a look at this picture here. This was done by John Wooden in 1715, and basically what we found was the ditch and the wall revetment, and it was revealed in both trenches. In this painting, which is entitled A Stag Hunt at Chirk by John, this painting appeared to show two concentric ditches. You can see them here coming round there, and clearly not evident on the ground to this day. And this painting appears to show, the two concentric ditch and wall circuits running around the northern side of the castle, with the gateways aligned with the main entrance you can see there. The castle shown on the left as it was before 1719. And this is just before when the Davis brothers put the screen and gates in, which have now been moved down, and a major feature of Chirk Castle further down the road. But at this point, they're still in situ in front of the castle. On the right, you can see the Berwyn Mountains over there. I will discuss that later. And there is the old bathhouse down there. There's a similar view of the castle, which was depicted in a painting entitled Chirk Castle from the North. And this was by Peter Tillerman in about 1720. This was done. This records a rectangular area directly in front of the principal elevation of the castle, and it's defined by the walls to the east, as you can see. It's very ornately painted garden gates, you can just see there. What's curious, really, about this is that this is only a number of years later, and you can see that the ha-ha doesn't seem to be shown clearly on there. So just coming back, I'd like to just emphasize at this point that both these paintings kind of utilize a kind of an artistic license, and just to confer a more traditional classical composition upon that subject that they're painted. And there's many features in here that have been brought into the frame that if you were to stand in this view today, they just wouldn't work. The situation of the mountains behind, the Berwyns on the previous picture, that can't be seen from that view. It's all been brought in as sort of artistic. So it kind of means that, in addition to this, you see that you can't necessarily trust everything you see, and when you're trying to date these paintings. In addition to this, the question may be asked: was the revetment wall and ditch that we found utilising an earlier feature, possibly Civil War or medieval defences? And it's kind of worth noting that most of the baronial castles in this area around certainly the Edwardian ones from the 13th century, had extensive outworks of subsidiary enclosures. Just got that at Ruthin, Holt, and at Denbighshire. So we did wonder at the time whether the ha-ha was reutilising some earlier defences. But anyway, let's move on, because I didn't really want to dwell too much on these particular features. Coming back to the Wooden painting, and this is where our journey really started. You see those buildings on the right-hand side there, I've circled them. Well, that got our interest. And in this one, which was by Peter Tillerman from the south, and this was done in 1726, you can see these buildings on the west side of the castle. I've circled the ones that we're particularly interested in. It's this twin gabled roof, which is towering over the woodland, and any of you who've been to the site will know that the broadleaf woodland that would have been there at the time would have been, these buildings, in order to catch that perspective, must have been 2 stories high, and there is absolutely no evidence of them on the ground today. Interestingly enough, here's an engraving. It's called A Prospect by Thomas Baddeslade in 1742, which is some time after Tillerman's painting. And then I've circled the area we were particularly interested in, and you can see no evidence whatsoever of a twin gable end or outbuildings in that area. That's this area down here. We've enlarged this prospect, actually gone in and looked at the original, and he's not included the building in there at all. Also of note, just looking at this, you'll note that in this area here today, when you go there, there's a big stable block that was built around about the 1760s, and at this time in 1742, the stable block is not there. There's been some debate as to whether this engraving is an interpretation of a layout of what was possibly planned and never came to pass, and we have to consider that as well while we're looking at this. But you'll see in 1742, at this point there's no evidence of a aha, and yet the earlier painting you saw, it did have some kind of ditched features in. Looking at the mapping, this is the Chirk Castle estate map. We've gone through quite a lot of the maps, and here you can see the building we're particularly interested in, this U-shaped building aligned north to south there. This is in 1775, so curiously enough, the building's still there to be mapped, and yet didn't appear on Badderslade's engraving. Just to add to the interest here is just to show that cartographers can get things slightly amiss. Those of you familiar with Chirk Castle have noticed this particular map's missing a tower, the famous Adams Tower, which if you go to that map, you can now see it, which is just there. So we'll just go back. Very curious, but at least there's some consistency with these outbuildings that we're looking for. Still there in 1820. And this, again, we found this curious because we went through a lot of the inventories, records, and staff at the National Trust looked into this, and there's absolutely no record whatsoever of any buildings on this side, and yet clearly here they are. So in 2019, we began our investigations. Here you see the little public footpath that's going down the side on the west side there. Just in the little corner there is what I affectionately refer to as the fairy tale turret built by Pugin in the 19th century. So those familiar with the site, you find your way up and up that road there to get to the castle. Down here is what people just refer to as the little trackway, little path takes you all the way around the woodland. Or is it? If you look at this edge here, there's a revetment wall. And we're quite sure, I'm just going to take us back a few pictures, that is that wall there. You can just see there coming round there, and so it's still there to this day, only you wouldn't know to look for it. So, down into the woodland, looking for a very large U-shaped building that is about the same size as one of those towers. So you can imagine we were quite excited by this. We wondered whether this building might be sitting on something earlier. And so this is us trying to plot out roughly where I thought we should look, and that's looking down towards the roadside. And this is where we started to dig in 2019. You can see the site in relation to the castle, which is in the back there. That's Adams Tower, towering up over the top there. And it was just a normal little sort of 2 metre wide by 11 metre long little trench, because we were digging on Offa's Dyke in the grounds at the same time as well. So our team spread all over. So this was just a little test dig, really, just to see what we could find. And lo and behold, there we dropped onto some archaeology. Now, just bear with me for a moment. The original size of this building here, we can see 2 walls coming across there, and this brick installation here that goes in tighter on that, as you can see. Clearly we dropped inside a building, so we were pretty sure we were on the money here. There's a back wall there. This is a slot through, so this is all the overburden that we took off to get down to that. So we'd found the basis of a building. So there you see it. That's what we had at the end of 2019. You can see that's the back wall there. There's an interior partition wall there. This is just doing little tests to see what the natural ground surface might look like underneath the floors. You'll see there's a lot of birding over here, and this is just sand, sort of foundation sand that was put in to lay the floor on, and then this over here just rises up to the castle. So we went back to our offices and we had a look at the shape of the building and where we thought it should be. Then we put our plot in for where we'd actually dug, and as you can see, give or take a metre, we were absolutely bang on with the location of finding the north wing of this, what we have now affectionately called in the West Building. Now the original purpose of the building is unknown, and we did find a significant quantity of what we call lead cane, which is bits of window lead tracery in there, along with some decorative ornate window glass, probably from the windows or from the castle. We did note that the whole area was just seemed to be a refuge dump for material coming from the castle. So from a volunteers excavation point of view, it's fantastic. Lots and lots of finds, but not necessarily telling us a great deal about the building, but it was telling us about what they've chucking over the wall from the castle. But if you're training volunteers how to recognise different types of ceramics, well, their cup overfloweth, basically. There was plenty of finds from all different periods, all dumped on top of this building. So, of course, we didn't realise that at the time. We had to slowly pick our way through. It's only when we came underneath that we realised that this building was there, and everything we'd taken off the top possibly had nothing to do with it. So here's an example of some of the things we found. That's a fragment of, this is in the first year's finds, of course, fragment of a tile, which you can see if you go to the long gallery in the castle. You can see the exact same tiles there. These were made for the Middleton family. That's their coat of arms there with the wolves on. Any fans of Games of Thrones, I think the Middletons should change their names to the Stark family, looking at that. And yes, that they date to around about 1820, 1830 from that period. Here's an example also of the lead tracery with some patterned glass. How on earth this managed to survive being thrown over the wall and down into the woodland is beyond me, but it's beautiful Pugin glass which dates from the 19th century. Again, tells us nothing about the building that we were looking at. However, the little ladle that you can see there, we found that in that little brick installation that I showed you in the trench illustration. Lots and lots of finds came out of this process, as you can see there, and down in the dairy in the National Trust buildings there, we were given that as an area to do a finds lab, and plenty of processing went on there. You can see all manner of stuff coming up there. We went away at the end of 2019 and started to look to see what we could find out about the building. National Trust staff had a good dig around as well. They found that there was an inventory in the Chirk estate dated to around about 1775. They listed that there was a blacksmith shop and a plumber's shop located somewhere at or near the castle. From the finds that we were getting initially, it did feel like we were looking at a repurposed workshop. Whether the building had had some sort of domestic status at first and then was converted to a smithy of some type, or whether doing some small-scale casting, we don't know. But it's also noted that that there was some lead hoppers at the top of some of the downpipes on the castle, dated to around about 1759. And We know that lead was purchased, 21 tons of lead purchased in 1680 to make pipe work. So they are processing lead and making their own plumbing for gardens. The Middletons were renowned for their pioneering gardening layouts and the water systems and the pipe work to feed those gardens. And we did start to wonder whether we were looking at a building associated with manufacturing of items on site. However, smelting of lead in large quantities just below the actual the castle or manor house as it was by then leaves something to be questioned with. But there we are. So all this, and we decided to come back in 2020. Of course, something happened around about that time that made excavation rather difficult, with volunteer numbers, spacing on site and things. But we went in with purpose and we managed to start digging there in 2020. And then we came back in September of last year to do further excavations. So what you're seeing now is a mixture of descriptions and pictures over the 2020 and 2021. That is what you're seeing there on the screen. There is our outline proposals where we wanted to put our trenches. So in 2020 we came back in to look at the main area here, as you can see, and then down the bottom here we were hoping in 2020 to put in more trenches to see if we could find if there was a south wing to this building, just to check that it was the right building. So that's what it looked like in 2020. And by the time our volunteers had finished, 10 days later, that's what they found. An incredible amount of earth shifted, and we've got the main part of the north wing of this building that you can see there. That's some of our volunteers. We had up to about 21 volunteers over both seasons spread out. Let's keep the numbers restricted due to COVID, but incredible amount of work undertaken there. You can see all the different bays in the building there. There's another picture there just showing it there. There are at least 4 rooms, each room built upon the natural bedrock terrace and levelled up with rubble and then sand where it's appropriate, because remember this building's on a slope, so they've got to sort of dig it into the hillside. The exterior walls were constructed from sandstone and bonded with yellow sheet kind of sandy lime mortar, so we knew we weren't looking at anything medieval at this point. And the walls were about I think about 0.8 meters wide, survived in height to just over a meter in the corner there. And the rooms were partitioned by similar sandstone built walls, but not, as you can see here, but not so substantial. So that's one room there, another room there raised up, big room, open room here, and then this one here. So we'll go through the rooms one by one just to give you some idea of what we found in there. Just this area here, this is an external wall that was in quite poor condition, and you'll notice this black area here of staining where the floor had been ripped up, and we found a lot of kind of smithy waste in that area, horseshoes, nails, all manner of things to suggest there was some kind of smithying work going on. And there must have been a partition across there, because that staining doesn't continue into the rest of that room. When you looked at this room in low light, you could see the impression of the flagstone floors. So basically the whole room had been cleaned out and demolished. So, and that's a view from above, and a little cobbled courtyard as well, just there. So that's outside the building. So let's go and have a look room by room. That's just an overview there. That's a nice photogrammetry view of what we had. This is taken in 2020. We came back and extended this area down here to explore things. If you can understand that in that COVID situation in 2020, we couldn't really get close and supervise our volunteers. So all we could do was clear out the rooms, gather what dating evidence we could, and that became quite evident that they've been completely cleaned out of anything of any use for dating for us. So we decided that a year later that we could return and start to take the floors up and look at some of the drains that were in there, and that's where you start to find all the datable artifacts that you're after. So this that's just a picture of what I'm going to call room 1 and 2. They've both got these structures, these brick structures that at the moment still no idea what they are. I'm hoping maybe somebody who's watching tonight, industrial archaeologists, might get some idea of what they are. The feeling is that they're constructed from handmade brick, and they've got like a flue at the base of them. There's a lot of burning in the areas next to them. There's 2 of them. Oh, we don't want to see that yet. Let's just go back. And there was a lot of lead waste and lead splash up against the walls around it. So curious. The floors have all been ripped out, as you can see, and been systematically demolished, and it's just all gone. Still no idea when these went in and whether this is kind of a second phase. But one of the things we did when we came back, let me just I'm just going to read you some notes I've got here from about that room. Just a picture of a couple of volunteers there. Both rooms at the east end of the building, which the rooms were about 4.5 by 5 meters in size. It contained the remains of these brick-built structures, which are possibly halves. Like I said, the purpose of the structures presently unknown. However, the artifactual evidence was consisted of that ladle that I showed you before, and large quantities of lead waste and residue on the adjacent walls. Curiously, a significant quantity of lead window tracery also came from this area, and window glass, but we now believe that that's probably chucked over from the castle. The other thing we found, which our metal detectorists were finding for us, there were 6 lead objects which have been provisionally identified as palm guards. If you can imagine, if you were to cast, sort of take a tennis ball, cut it in half, and you've got a lead. These things were made from lead, and they fit perfectly in your hand. And I've been told that they would go inside like a leather glove or something, and if you were doing any sort of leather upholstery, saddle work, and they act like a giant sort of industrial thimble in your hand. So that's what they call them, palm guards. And we found 6 of these only in that room, nowhere else, which was quite curious. So it's worthy of note. Coming back into 2021, we wanted to see, like I said, we wanted to get underneath and have a look at the dates of these floors. This area here, we decided to put a test area in, take the sand and clay floors off, and underneath we found lots of rubble that had been laid down into the natural clay. So we've got a little bit of dating evidence from down here. There's no cut for this wall. The ceramic that we found there is dated to the very early 18th century, sort of 1720, something like that. I think it was some mottled ware ceramic and some other earthenware that was from that period, and some clay pipe bowls, this little clay pipe smoking bowls, sort of dating to the late 17th century, all in that area. So, and they were in secure context, so fairly happy that starting to date this building at this point. Excuse me, I'll just move around. So here we are now looking at what I'm calling our second room here, which is we thought was some kind of laundry area. Why it was raised up, we're not sure. But what was curious was looking at this. We've got the remains of the flagstone floor in this corner here, and then there's this circular fixture that's been ripped out next to this little furnace. I did wonder whether it's a large copper, something that might have held water. Like, this is why we started wondering about whether we had a laundry room or something. But I really am clutching at straws on that one. But needless to say, there was this drain coming across the building here. This has been added in later, which we start to realise now we're looking at different phases of use for this building. And the floors have been removed and a drain been placed in. And then when the whole building was demolished, this drain has been filled in. What you're seeing there is just building rubble and demolition that went and fell into this drain once they'd ripped everything up. So quite curious as to what's gone on there. That's it, excavated at the end of September last year, and with a section through it. And also, what is also of note here is it's truncated and gone straight through this party wall here, which is curious in the sense that it's implying that the change of use of building, are they knocking down partition walls to open them up, ceasing to be such a domestic building now and becoming something more like a little artisan's workshops. Very interesting. This was in the third room. They'd taken up all the flagstone floors, and set around it was this curious clay-filled feature. And when we emptied it, we found a number of lead weights, sort of almost imperial lead weights, perfectly same size as the old-fashioned cast iron weights that you could get, and for some reason they've been dumped inside this. Again, no idea what this feature's about, other than they're making rough out lead weights and then knocking around in the features there. So that was room 3. Room 4, which I haven't got a picture of here, which we saw on the plan before. The full extent of that we didn't get to actually see, but it was at least 5 by 4 meters wide, and it was on the western bounds of the excavation. Heavily disturbed by tree rooting, but we found a lime-covered floor surface over there. A small number of lead weights, possibly drilled musket balls. Somebody did tell us, I think one of the metal detectors said. Together with a lot of animal bone, which was recovered from a corner of that particular room. What was interesting about the animal bone, it was, without exception, all of the animal bone was similar. And it was one particular type of metacarpal leg bone, possibly from deer. Remember, this building is located in a deer park. It's a bit of a matter of conjecture, but you find this type of bone recovered on archaeological sites all over the country, going back to medieval, prehistoric times. And you start to wonder whether this particular type of bone was being kept for making tools out of, some sort of recycling process where they're processing deer from the park. So again, just putting that out there, it's just conjecture, but it seemed we found these things only in room 4. We didn't find them anywhere else, so that room had been set aside for some kind of process. So there we are. And coming back to the smithy, I was telling you about, this area here is where the exterior wall was for the north wing of this building. So outside, you're seeing a culvert, stone-lined culvert here, somewhat disturbed, with what remains of a cobbled courtyard, which you would imagine was outside the building, in the carriageway. If you remember that trackway I showed you right at the beginning of the presentation with the revetment wall, that is the carriageway, we now realise, and this cobbled floor is underneath that. So if you're walking down there, anytime soon through Chirk Estate. I can tell you that there is a perfectly preserved cobbled courtyard floor in the woodland there underneath. This sealed this stone culvert, which is fascinating because we left it in 2020 wondering, did it go underneath the building? Did it predate? Well, it certainly did. And it had next to it this ash-stained earthen floor. It contained, just going back to the that particular floor, this stone-built drain culvert, which exited the building, it was at least about a metre wide, and it extended beyond the building and went underneath the courtyard and out into the woodland. So we decided that this probably would become a good focal point for dating. From an archaeological point, stratigraphically, it's the earliest feature on the site because it predated the building. So we threw all our resources into this area. And you can see here that you've got all this rubble just... Oh, my mouse is playing up, sorry about that. You can see that rubble has been purposely put into the culvert, so the culvert was no longer in use, and that rubble was put in there so that the exterior wall for the building could bridge over the culvert. So that's basically foundation material for the wing of the building, and that's curious again. So we took that off. That's one of our volunteers there, Dave Priest from Mould here. He's actually leaning on top of the exterior wall of that building, and Ian Davis, one of our professional archaeologists from Chirk, he's actually trying to get underneath, looking basically for dating evidence for this building. There it is. That's quite a nice view of it, looking back towards where we hope to find the south wing of the building. It's you can see we've removed the capstones there. We noted actually that some of these capstones have been removed in antiquity. The cobble floor, once this had been backfilled, the cobble floor had been laid over the top of it. So when was it built? Well, still not quite sure about that. What I can tell you is when we went down into it, and we got right down to the back where you're into natural drainage fills, nothing to do with the backfilling or demolition of buildings or anything. And in there we found a clay pipe bowl. So again, we don't think this is medieval, but it's still curious. And you can see there's also a little brick, handmade brick that's been built into the side on the right hand side there, and that's not an add-on. There's a little inlet there, so that is contemporary with this build. So that you start to wonder when this was actually built. We found, like I said, we found a clay pipe bowl right at the back there, which looked to date from about mid 1600s. So I'm wondering whether this culvert was in place sometime around about the Civil War, or is part of the rebuild after the war, because the castle did get damaged at some point during the Civil War. Just come back to this now. So further dating evidence. So the artifactual recovery rate from the excavation, specifically the pottery and Chirk count, was fairly high, but mainly for overburden material, not actually dating the building. But I'm fairly confident, based on the little excavation of the drains and the culverts that we did find, that we're happy that this building does date to sometime around post-Civil War, starting sometime around about 1680, 1690, something like that. Stays in use right through to the early part of 1700s, and then, for reasons we do not know, was systematically demolished, the footprint of which is still visible in 1820. But one of the things we did note was that a lot of we removed a considerable amount of stone rubble during the excavation. A vast quantity of this just represented sort of core material that come from within the walls of the building. There was no facing stone at all. We didn't recover any facing stone in the demolition. So clearly it's been this building has been used as a quarry to supply facing stone and reused. I would guess possibly either something to do with the stable block in the 1760s, or it's something to do with Pugin's renovation in around about the 1820s, 1830s, and they're using the material to help with the upper levels of the castle where they're redesigning things, so they're reusing this material, or it's been used, shipped off for buildings like lodges and estate buildings around the estate. There's sort of plenty of those. What else can I tell you? Yeah, so lots and lots of ceramic finds, so lots of very happy volunteers, but very few pottery finds that actually dated the building. But I think we've pretty much nailed down that it's not medieval, and its life starts sometime around about the late 1600s. What else can we say? So we mentioned we were looking for the south wing as well. So we came back in 21 September and wanted to have a look in the areas where I've marked Trench 3 and Trench 2. Limited amount of excavation, all dug by hand in this area here. And there you can see the estate road there, and a little public, it's not a public footpath, just a little desire path running through our area. And on the face of it, nothing at all there. We started to excavate away there, and you can see the beginnings. We've got 3 trenches actually that we started to put in at this point, because the trench right at the back, where the gentleman in the light blue shirt is, that proved to be, as we realised, outside the south wing of the building. And so we put another trench in just to the left at the back. You can see the background with the yellow bucket in, and you'll see the outcome of that in a moment. So in the foreground here, 2 of our volunteers just starting to come across this, as you can see. That's a rubble spread. Now by this time we'd come to learn what this was, because we saw plenty of it in 2020 over in the other building. And this is how these demolished buildings appear. We'd assumed that that material was going to be inside the building, and we were looking on the left hand side. We assumed here that that was the interior, the internal wall in that U-shaped building, and all this would be inside the building. And then we've lost all the rooms over here. In fact, our conclusions were wrong, and what we were looking at actually there was the wall line for the building, and this area over here is the actual floor inside the rooms. When we put a section through it, we could see that down there, not very clear, but is the remains of masonry wall, sandstone wall. All the material over the top is just demolition rubble, and to the right hand side you've just got sort of woodland material that's built up as well. When you look at it from another angle, you can see all the demolition over the top, and at the base of that trench you can start to see the sandstone wall there, which again, when we measured it in its entirety, say exactly the same width, 0.8 meters wide, as the external walls in the north wing. So we were happy we had finally found our south wing. Everything to the right of it is upstanding clay floor, and there you see that's looking back up slope. We didn't realise this at the time. This sort of came out in post-excavation a bit later, that we realised that all that ground surface there was not natural subsoil. It was in clay floors that had been brought in and were inside the rooms. You can see the mortar going underneath. So from a disappointing point of view, our trench just missed the inside of a south wing room, and if we ever got the opportunity to go back and do further work on this building, I would be inclined to put a trench right across the width, going back up towards that culvert and that courtyard, and we drop inside a room from the south wing, and it'd be nice to get some dated evidence from that. Again, all the walls been robbed away, reused somewhere else. The flagstone floors are gone. Some of the building material that we found in the rubble, these are a mixture of slate and stone roofing tiles, you can see there. We recovered some from the north wing as well, but they were 2-3 times bigger than this huge thing. So when this building would have collapsed, it would have had some weight came down on top of it. Apologies for the quality of this picture. This was taken sort of like 6 o'clock at night in September, and it's just slightly blurred. This was the little trench extended to the north that managed to, just near trench 3. So if I just go back a few, let's have a look. Just want to show you where this is. So this is this area here. So this trench, so we've got a wall that we've found there. So the other thing I should point out at this point now, we now realise that footprint that we've put in there, the scale's wrong, and the whole thing needs to shift up slope. The south wing is in slightly, this area needs to come that way, upwards, and we found that wall and the beginning of this floor. One of our trenches ended up, we realised, was outside the building, so we put a trench in this area here, looking for the back wall, and here we go. There it is. So that's a continuation of that external wall again. So if we'd have extended the trench further over, we'd have found the back of the whole wing, and that's looking at it from another angle. So it's been quite a journey, and we're really happy. We found the south wing of the west building, and it does seem to have the layout that everybody thinks it should have. It's incredible you stand there today to realise that a building that has a footprint bigger than Adam's Tower, the medieval tower, is sitting in the undergrowth there. As to its original use, was it a grand domestic building, a guest house for the hunting park in the Civil War period? Did it during the siege? We know to the south, I should say to the west of this building, in the Civil War period, this building would have been right in the line of sight of the siege guns. I do wonder whether it took a hit in some shape or form, because the damage to the castle reportedly is in that line of sight behind this building. So that raises questions. Or was this building built after the Civil War period, which is, again, the evidence seems to suggest late 1600s. So that would be about right, I think. Quite a short life, really. And then they realised in the 1820s that during the redesign of the castle views, and during Eames's period when he was redesigning the park, they've cleared views from the castle windows so that you've got a clear line of sight. And I'm guessing this building and the other building that was on the mapping was blocking very much that vista, and they've decided they've gone out of use and they've reused and purposed the stone and anything else they could recycle into the building. So that concludes our excavation. The end for now, I would say, and that's just a picture of some of our volunteers. Like I said, there was up to 21 over any particular time. I'm absolutely astounded at the effort that they put in. They shifted an awful lot of material by hand, and it's an incredible amount of work that they did. We hope to return at some point. So the plans for the future, I should say. As part of a longer-term strategy, the National Trust are considering the possibility of reconsolidating and displaying some of the building remains, because what we've done is we've covered them in terrain and reconsolidated and put topsoil over the top. But as and when the National Trust are in a good place to do so, they may well intend to uncover certain parts of the building. What we are going to be doing is putting interpretation panels and write-up. We've still got a lot of post-excavation work to do, and clearly there is material in the archives, whether it be down in the National Archives for the Middleton family, or even actually at the property. Members of the staff are going through that paperwork, and who knows, we may find some further evidence of the purpose of this building. So that concludes my talk for tonight, and I'm going to hand you back to Jack.